Hi, everyone, and welcome to an event that I am really excited about, which is a conversation with Cass Sunstein. Cass is not only a friend and longtime GiveDirectly supporter, he is one of the great behavioral and legal scholars of our time. I did some Googling, Cass, and you do seem to be the most cited legal scholar out there. But beyond that, I think what has really drawn me to Cass over the years is that he is a great doer and an extraordinary practicalist, taking the theories and ideas and actually putting them into practice. He has served as the administrator of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, is a professor at Harvard Law School, and the founder of the program on behavioral economics and public policy. He is also the author of some of my favorite behavioral books, which I encourage everyone to read, from Nudge to Sludge, Noise, and even a book on Star Wars. There are also many books, Cass, I have discovered in the process that there are some of your books that I have not read from way back, which I look forward to, but the list is too long to read here. So it's with great excitement that I welcome us to this conversation. Thanks, Cass, for joining us over the weekend.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. You were one of my heroes, and the work you've done, both theoretically and put into practice, is an inspiration to the world.
It's really generous, Cass. Let's kick off on Nudge, which is you've just released what is the final release. I am wondering what's new in the update, and is it really the final release, or is that just a nudge to yourself?
Well, TBD. So the co-authors had extended arguments, let's say, about the subtitle of the book. And Thaler's view was that he didn't want to do an edition after this. And my view was we didn't know. And his view was if we put the final edition as the subtitle, then it will be a pre-commitment strategy such that we will not do the book again. And he loved that pre-commitment strategy, and I thought it was funny. And as typical between the co-authors, if he has an idea that he likes and that I think is funny, it will stick. So that's where we went. But if you read the preface, you'll see that like an episode of an Avengers movie, or maybe a Star Wars movie, where it looks like it's the last one, or maybe a Sopranos series, it looks like it's the last one, there might be a little tiny open door. I think one of the co-authors thinks it's closed shut, the other thinks it has a little crack, and the preface gives clarity about that slight difference in perspective. The book has been written, again, really, from head to toe, front to back. Maybe that's more precise, front to back than head to toe. And we discovered a behavioral bias in the process of doing the book, which is we expected just to do a little updating maybe and add some bonus material. That was our plan. But as with home improvement, where you decide, you want to put a new table in the kitchen, and then you think, well, the cave is a little small. We maybe want to knock out the wall, and maybe the downstairs has some issues, and we should do something with the downstairs generally. It's a home improvement bias, we call it, and that means that you underestimate the extent of remodeling that you're going to do once you start. And that's what happened with our book. And one of the features of the restructuring that we did was to add both concepts and practices that we hadn't had clearly enough in mind. So I'll give you a couple. Sludge has pride of place in the book. I have a separate book on that, but it plays a significant role in Nudge, the final edition, where the point is administrative frictions and burdens and barriers of various sorts can be extremely demotivating and can, for a charity or a government program or a private business, be like a wall that is an unintended wall between people and something they kind of want to do. It could also be, Sludge can be something for a recipient of benefits, whether it's private or public. If you have to do stuff to get the benefits, you might not get the benefits because you might not do stuff. So that's Sludge. curation plays a significant role in the book. We're intrigued by the fact that there are online opportunities to dispense with curators. And sometimes people do that, but sometimes people don't. They want the curator. Think maybe of your local bookstore, which you might cherish because it's a curator, or a restaurant, which you might cherish because it's a curator. And those are things that are really important to people. But the point about curation is that often curators are great nudgers. And this is true in the nonprofit sector. It's true for the admirable companies of the world. They are curators. And it's true also for public officials who can be curating something for citizens, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. We have a lot to say about climate change. And the basic idea is that environmental problems, which are problems of externalities, can't be sufficiently solved by nudges, but nudges can really help. Whether it's a household which is trying to minimize its carbon footprint, or a small company that is trying to do the same, or a large company that's trying to use solar or wind rather than coal. There are a lot of nudges that can help. We have something to say about poverty also. In fact, we have a fair bit to say about poverty. We don't know nearly as much as you do about that, but we know a few things.
Let's hop into that. I'm also thinking as you speak. I have not bought a house because I know I would do incessant repairs, and I also have not started a book, and I'm now left to reflect on whether it's a similar reason. Let's talk about poverty and nudging, and then I want to come to sludge and poverty. So GiveDirectly has experimented with some nudges in cases, and one of the internal tensions that we have is whether or not that is at odds with our philosophy of unconditionality and letting recipients choose for themselves. How do you think about it? And at a practical level, what advice would you give to us on what the bound is?
Okay, what a great question. I'd want to listen a lot to you about the particular situation before giving advice, but I'll kind of approach the question. Suppose you have a beneficiary of a program in the United States. Let's say it's a private program that's designed to reduce hunger in a community. It may be that the best approach is one that operates a little like a GPS device. That is, it gives people clarity about the direction that they would like to go. And let's call it a direction where they are not hungry anymore and they're also healthy, but ultimately allows them to choose their own way if they don't like what the GPS is suggesting. So to be more specific, it might be that an anti-hunger program can have a bunch of nudges in it about options that are, let's say, within the relevant population, likely to improve their well-being. And it could be something as simple as educative nudges that tell people things about, calories and obesity or diabetes or nutritional content. Or it could be a little more architectural, where the options the GPS prefers are the ones that are listed first and in the largest font. Yeah. And these things are all, I think, on the table. The question is, what are the welfare effects? It might be that the full neutrality, let's call it, which is to try to be as choice-friendly and nudge-free as you possibly can be, is better. But that would depend on a lot of heterogeneity in the population and a lot of clarity in the population about what are the right choices for them.
Well, it's so interesting because it hits on something that we talk a lot about. You said gives them direction on where they want to go. And the question we have is, where do people want to go? And the way we tend to talk about it internally is what's best. And as you look at a lot of charity evaluators, they take a stand on that. So education may be better than healthcare, healthcare may be better than investment, and so on. And at its essence, the philosophy of cash is that there is no universal best. Each family will define what's best for themselves. And that's where we sort of gotten stuck. The two places that we've done nudges, one was, it was in partnership. It was around financial literacy and business literacy, where folks were given, in addition to the cash, an app to help them budget, save, that sort of thing. And the other nudge was exactly a planning nudge, where we actually asked people afterwards to sit with their partner and put together a plan. So it's a very long way of asking, how would you decide where folks want to go?
Okay, this is a great choice architecture problem. So let's maybe make a distinction between two kinds of things. Let's call the first savings plans, and let's call the second meals at restaurants in the town in which you live.
Yes.
In the second, you let's say know the restaurants, and you know what you like, and you've been there, or you can get there several times easily. And there we would want a form of choice architecture. This would be a presumption that is neutral with respect to options. Because let's say Barbara and Bill know whether they like shrimp or chicken or the vegetarian option, and that nudging, let's say presumptively, is not a great idea because it'll make them worse off because they know what they're doing. Think of the choice of ice cream flavors. Now, there could be some qualifications, like if a calorie label might be a good idea, or the restaurant may have some new offering where they might want to nudge people to choose it, even if they're not interested in money, but they're interested in consumer satisfaction. But basically, restaurants in your town, the right choice architecture is presumptively one that is as neutral as possible. Now, compare savings plans, where universities all over the United States, and they're similar in other places than the United States, they nudge people to enroll in a pension plan and to end up with a diversified, passively managed index fund. So there's both nudge with respect to enrollment and nudge with respect to what you're going to enroll in. And there's a nudge with respect to the contribution level also. Now, is that a kind of Stalinist move by universities over the United States? I don't think so. I think it's recognizing that this choice is technical, it's hard to figure it out, takes a lot of work. If people want to engage in that work, go for it. And if people just think, I kind of don't like passively managed index funds, or I don't like savings, they're completely allowed to go their own way. But in an area where we have reason to think that choosers can benefit from nudges, then that's better than as neutral as possible choice architecture. And it's an empirical question, in what context which would be best. So to nudge people like crazy to choose, let's say, chicken would be a little peculiar unless there's something in the circumstances that warrants that. But to nudge people to have a contribution rate of, let's say, X percent, where X is a very sensible percent, rather than half X or 2X, that's good.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's been interesting on savings, because I think savings in the context you're talking makes a lot of sense. I think savings has become a very positive word globally, and often gets used to push people to save in contexts where savings may not be the right thing. So if you're on the edge of poverty, the idea of shifting today's resources to tomorrow, when today may be the life or death situation, may not be the outcome we're going for. But as I look at a number of development programs, you do see that we need them to save more. And I say, no, we need them to consume more and earn more. We may not need them to save more right now.
No, you're raising great points, and they're deep points, if I may say, where, okay, so the problems we're discussing are choice architecture problems. And this is true for, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has a choice architecture issue with respect to school meals. The Social Security Administration has a bunch of choice architecture programs for it.
Yep.
So the Department of Education has choice architecture programs when it's dealing with teachers or administrators or students. Charities have a zillion choice architecture problems, which are often, potentially at least, resolved by either intuition or casual empiricism. And it might be that the right choice architecture is one in which the choice architect says the chooser knows a lot better. That I live in some different place, that I think things about, let's say, savings or housing and their importance.
That's right.
But I don't know. And then the right form of choice architecture is associated with these brilliant, beautiful passages in On Liberty by John Stuart Mill, in which he says the reason for freedom is that the chooser knows better than anyone else about what he cares about, what he or she needs. And Mill was good, by the way, even though a long time ago on he or she. He was an early he or she kind of a guy. But he says the chooser is pro-chooser on epistemic grounds. The choosers have knowledge that no one else can have. Now, the behavioral revolution, let's call it, has put a lot of footnotes next to Mill's claim, and some of the footnotes deserve to be chapters. I've probably written some of those chapters. Still, Mill's insight is enduring. And if you're dealing with people in some place, that's far away and they're really struggling, to think the form of choice architecture that's best is one that allows them to figure it out, giving them more resources, that has a serious claim to our attention.
That makes a lot of sense. Have you seen empirics around? I know we've talked about this. So there's giving the complete neutral frame. So here's cash, do what you want with it. There's also asking people in advance, what nudges would you like? So we're here to serve your choice. There's some veil of ignorance. What would you like us to nudge you on? What's been done on that kind of pre-choice, or what's your nudge preference surveys?
Okay, so I have a lot of data, international data, on the question whether people like nudges, to which they themselves are subject. And the data actually stuns me, the positivity toward nudges with respect to health, safety, the environment, and even savings. People are very upbeat about nudges. The qualifications take the following form. If people think that people are being nudged in a way that is inconsistent with their interests or their values, they get mad. So if they're nudged, let's say, to be part of a particular religious group unless they say otherwise, they don't like that. Or if they're presumptively part of the majority political party unless they opt out, they don't like
right.
that. So inconsistent with interests or values. If people think that they are being manipulated in some way, they get mad, and reject the nudge. But I worked really hard to find a lot of things that would fall in that category and failed. Subliminal advertising falls in that category. Someone else found that if there are optical illusions on the streets to try to get you drive a certain way, slow down.
They work.
Like that? They don't like that because it's manipulative. But the category of manipulation is narrow. If people think that the choice architect is promoting his or her own interests, then people get really, really mad. They don't like that at all. But outside of those categories, it's pretty hard. If people think that their money is being taken without their consent, or something's being taken without their consent, there you can get negative results. So if people, I tried, by the way, to see what people would think about automatic enrollment in charities. And I expected that if I tried a bunch of versions, I could find one that a majority of Americans would like, and I failed. I use uncontroversial, I thought, organizations. I haven't used GiveDirectly, but I use.
I say you haven't.
Yeah, maybe that would work, but automatic enrollment, people don't like that. And the general principle, this is for U.S. population, seems to be people are going to lose money or an organ or something. They want it to be a result of affirmative consent. So I don't have data on whether, to precisely your question about whether people behind a veil of ignorance would want to be nudged. But I do have a lot of information about whether people want information, a lot of data on that. And the results are extremely interesting and heterogeneous. So people are mixed on calorie labels, even though they want a calorie label mandate. And I think the reason they're mixed on calorie labels is that some of them think they don't want their meals to be ruined by their thinking about how much weight they're going to gain. They want to enjoy their meal without worrying over that. And people are mixed about some kinds of information bearing on health and safety, either because they think they already have the information, they don't need it, or because they think the information will make them scared or sad. And that affects people's reactions to nudges. There is a new dissertation that's online that shows the default nudges generally produce very positive reactions on the part of people who are potentially subject to them. So automatic enrollment and things is something that people typically like, unless they're being automatically enrolled in something they hate. So automatic enrollment in savings plans, health plans, anti-poverty programs, this kind of thing seems to produce nods of assent and smiles rather than a sense of outrage and words like fascism. People don't react that way to automatic enrollment.
Sorry about the video, Cass. I thought I had great internet. I did hear you the whole time. So hopefully you can all hear me. I mean, one thing that we may do, and we can talk offline, is to actually see if we could make recipients their own choice architects, which to us is the next level of giving them the choice over the capital. So there's two levels of question. One is program design. What do you think the right amount of money per person is? What do you think the right targeting mechanism is? And then on top of it, it is, what are the nudges you would like as we go through this program ahead of time?
This is completely fascinating. So, and it's a research agenda that I'm going to pursue in the fullness of time. And it's about agency. So I think behavioral science, including economists, have devoted too little attention to the question of agency. Let me talk a little bit about that. There's work, and I've done a little bit, on control. And it suggests that people will be willing to pay a certain amount of money to have control over investments, even when they've learned in real time that they'll lose money that way compared to giving money to a delegate. So if you're asked, do you want to manage your investment, at least in our study, or do you want to give it to someone who you've learned is better than you? What will you do? And people will demand money to give up control. They won't, if it's a fortune, they'll say, let the delegate do it. But if it's something real, they'll say they want to maintain control. And there's a little literature on the control premium that captures this. There's also some old work. There's also new versions of it on something called reactance, which I think is extremely interesting, where reactance is that people get negative about an instruction or an order because it's an instruction or an order, not because they dislike the content, but because something in them turns red when they're told to do something. And that suggests that for recipients of things, if their agency is compromised, of course, there'd be heterogeneity across persons and maybe across cultures on this. But if people they feel humiliated and treated disrespectfully and angry. And one thing about GiveDirectly that is exciting is that it's very agency friendly on the part of recipients.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, as you mentioned, it's hard to measure. So recipients don't use the word agency, but they will talk about dignity of choice, which is you've given me the dignity to make my own decisions, and I want to say thank you for that. And that's not something that's going to show up in the randomized evaluation. It's not something that we can put a number on, but it is something that is quite palpable when you talk to recipients. Let me just remind folks that there is an ask question button at the bottom if folks have questions. Cass, if we can, let's move to Sludge for a second. I have to say, for those that haven't read Sludge, I found Sludge to be one of the more cathartic books I've read in the last decade or so, because there's so much that I have found frustrating in day-to-day life, and you capture a lot of that, which was just a great read. What has frustrated you the most, Cass, and what motivated the book, if there's one story or whatnot?
Okay, so I think what motivated the book originally was that I subscribed to five magazines, maybe it was 3, a number of years ago, because my credit card company said you can get a number of magazines for free. And I thought that was great. And after 20 years, I learned I had been subscribing to those magazines and paying for 19 years and 9 months. It was a 3-month subscription. And there was just a little sludge that I had to go through to stop subscribing. And I kept thinking I would do that the following week. And it took 19 years and 9 months and the prospect of government employment to get me to under the sludge. So that was something that got me onto the topic. Once Dick Thaler and I have been talking about Sludge, both together and separately, for probably about 5 or 6 years. And when I worked in the US government, before we had the term, I noticed that the US government, I was in charge of the Paperwork Reduction Act. By the way, I don't say that with pride. And the first sentence of the book is, this book is a product of a failure. I'd forgotten that. I looked at the book again in anticipation of this discussion. And I saw that there were many things that the government was doing, whether it involved permits or information collection requests, as they're called, from taxpayers or small businesses or students or nurses. And the fact that it was, when I was there, 9 billion hours, and then I just saw all the requests, I thought, this is a cruelty. It's an insult to dignity. And it often diverts time from things that people really should be devoting their scarce hours to. And it also often blocks people from getting access to things, which can turn their lives around. Like the take-up rate for federal programs is often in the vicinity of 40 to 60%. Pause over that. These are programs that can make a massive difference to the lives of people over 80 or people under 8, and often they're not benefiting. And it's sludge. So just seeing that when I was in government, I was lacerated myself at doing too little about it. We had other things. And in daily life, I moved to Washington recently, and to get my cell phone changed in some minor way took hours. It's not the most important public policy problem facing the world today, but it's a real problem. And one encounters it everywhere.
I'm gonna, before we get into the government side and poverty programs, what's the best advice you have for dealing with the day-to-day sludge on a frustration level, as someone that finds it very frustrating?
Well, for organizations, there should be sludge audits, both for clients and customers or beneficiaries and for employees. So we need sludge audits, and they should not themselves be sludgeful. So I traveled a lot before I took my current government job and before COVID. And I asked public officials in multiple countries, do you know how much paperwork burden you impose on your citizens? And they didn't. So sludge audits, meaning just figure out how many hours of sludge are there each week, each month. And once one sees that, one is profoundly motivated to reduce it because it's typically crushingly higher than anyone expected. So do a sludge audit, then do some kind of cost-benefit analysis of whether sludge reduction would be in the interest of the relevant institution, and the answer is almost always yes.
Yeah, I can imagine. One place that sludge comes up, and you might have seen Michael Kramer's work on this, is whether or not you want to put some hurdle in place as a targeting means. Yeah. So in the context of GiveDirectly, one thing that had come up is, what if you made people call a phone line and listen to advertisements for 30 minutes? Maybe you can get the corporates to pay for that. And people that are wealthy are not going to spend 30 minutes listening to advertisements on the phone. So wouldn't this be a great way to actually target your program? Okay. What do you say to that perspective?
I say that it has a distinguished literature, including work by one of my favorite social theorists, let's call him that, Richard Zeckhauser. He's an economist, but he's basically everything he knows. And the idea of targeting is something he's explored. I'm very bearish on sludge as a targeting mechanism. For people who are poor, it's often perverse. There's data suggesting it often has exactly the effect that was not intended, in part because if you are poor, you often have scarcity of attention, and you're kind of struggling, more than kind of struggling, you're struggling to get through a day. And to ask you to navigate half an hour on the phone or go someplace and sit in a room is to ensure that you won't get there. And the people who get there, meaning get to the benefit that could help you tremendously. So that the idea that sludge is often an effective targeting mechanism is born of, I think, too much math and too much conceptual stuff and too little empirics. It's not that it's never true, but there's data suggesting, recent data suggesting it's the opposite of true.
I happen to agree. You'll be happy to know we have not made anyone listen to corporate advertisements. We did partner with the Togo government. And I don't know if I shared this, but what I think on the Togo government's perspective, I just saw Minister Lawson, one of the most impressive anti-sludge programs. So what they did is, through some machine learning off of people's collected phone data with permission, could actually identify who is poor. And the insight is, if you're calling Europe every day, if you're getting remittances cross-border, you're probably not the poorest of the poor in the country. So you use that to pinpoint who's eligible for the program. You enroll them digitally via text message. Hi, Cass, you've been identified as eligible. Would you like to enroll? Click 1 here. And within seconds, money is transferred to your phone. Probably one of the simplest examples of government programs I've seen, which let them reach hundreds of thousands within days. So if ever you're looking for the anti-sludge example, I think the Togo government's Novisi program is just a pretty amazing example.
That's fantastic. And when we think of approaches informed by behavioral science that can have a very large effect in a hurry, sludge reduction is typically that. In the United States, there's something that's a cousin of what you just described, which is, it's called direct certification. And it means that parents of poor kids in the United States don't have to opt in to free, nutritious school meal programs, lunches and breakfasts. They're automatically in like that. If they're known to be eligible, they don't have to participate if they don't want to. And a recent count found that 15 million children in the United States were benefiting from direct certification, either that program itself or its cousin. And that kind of impact from an approach informed by behavioral science, that's rare.
Yeah. Have you seen more of that in government? You've been in and out of government for some time. How is it changing? How much sludge reduction, how much behavioral is at the center of what we're doing?
It's definitely taken off, I think, within the last year in particular. So I work with the World Health Organization on a behavioral science team that advises the WHO, and sludge reduction is something they are working hard on. The United Nations, the Secretary General actually announced a behavioral science initiative relatively recently, several months ago, and sludge reduction was called out in particular. The UN is very much focusing on that. In the United States, state and local and the national government are engaged in sludge reduction work. And I'll tell you, speaking in my personal capacity, not in my capacity as public official, but I will note that the Biden administration had a report on equity, which the Office of Management and Budget released, a very important report. And the second finding in a short set of findings, number 2, which is pride of place, said that administrative burdens are a significant source of inequity. And the report referred specifically to sludge, it used the term, and it had numerous examples. So this is something which the US government is very much interested in fixing, and you can see it in multiple other nations. Little drink.
So what's the barrier from here? It seems like this should be a relatively bipartisan topic. Is it know-how? Is it will? Like, how do we go from here to where we need to be?
I love the word bipartisan. With respect to financial aid, sorry, I'm completely healthy. I have COVID. Can you excuse me for 3 seconds? I'm going to get a drink.
Please. I won't. Please have water.
I'll be right back.
I'll take a moment. Thank you all again for joining, and please do ask questions.
I am returning. I have returned. So
we see you.
Do you know that trick, Michael, that if you are asked a very hard question, you should pretend to cough and kind of go off screen? So,
I'm flattered.
See if it worked. So here are the barriers. Number 1, lawyers. I am one. I saw in government, and I know it's true in the private sector also, that lawyers will often say that sludge is a way of reducing, this may be a new term, litigation risk. So the idea is if you cut the sludge significantly, there may be a litigation risk in the sense that you may be sued because you've increased eligibility, potentially making eligible people who don't have a legal right to the thing in question. So barrier number 1 is lawyerly caution. Barrier number 2 is program integrity. And let's call that a cousin of lawyerly caution, but more clearly honorable. Not that lawyerly caution is dishonorable, but sometimes it's a little too risk averse. The idea of program integrity is a company might think we don't want to sign employees up for something they're not eligible for, and the sludge is essential to make sure they're eligible. Or it may be that beneficiaries of an anti-poverty program have to go through a lot of sludge, and that's because we want to make sure they're actually entitled to the benefits that they're seeking. And it may be the sludge is overkill, typically, well, let's be a little more lawyerly cautious frequently. It is overkill, but the ultimate goal is program integrity. A third possibility is that the reason for sludge is deliberately to limit the number of people who could benefit from the relevant program. It may be that the level of enthusiasm for the program on the part of the people who create it and run it is not that high, and they have to have the program. They didn't have the votes or the power to stop it, but at least they can limit the population of people who can participate in it. That's kind of a second best to not having it. And a fourth reason for sludge is data collection, where it may be that there are frequent reporting requirements, let's say for people who are getting stuff from a charity, or getting stuff that can be money or something from the government. And the sludge, which is not at all welcome, is a way to get data to see how the program's working. And that might be an adequate justification for relatively high levels of sludge. But in some parts of various governments, let's put it, that is not an adequate justification. So quarterly reporting is too much, and annual reporting would give what's needed. And the adverse effects of the reporting requirements, which may involve disqualification, are not technically cruel and unusual punishment, but that's what they are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I might have found a place. Just sorry, I lost my words. Is preservation one of the reasons for sludge? As he was going through some of those examples, I can think of places where, yes, we're collecting data, but we could be doing this in a more efficient, automated way, but we're not for some reason. How much of that is preservation of org, preservation of job?
That's a very good point. So there have been efforts in the United States to simplify the tax system that have the virtue, potentially, of reducing the burden on taxpayers, so they don't have to do so much. The United States imposes, last count, 11 billion annual hours in paperwork burdens. 11 billion hours. A majority of that comes from the Department of Treasury. The majority of that comes from the Internal Revenue Service. Now, we don't want to discount the hundreds of millions of hours that come from other agencies. Still, the Internal Revenue Service is the prime paperwork burden generator. If it simplified radically, then there would be tax preparers who would lose their jobs because their services wouldn't be needed anymore. And they have fought very hard against efforts to simplify. And they've made arguments that are not self-serving. That is, they are, the arguments are about things that everyone will.
The self-serving arguments don't work.
They're self-serving. They aren't, I should say,
but they're self-serving.
But they're self-serving.
I've got to ask you a rapid fire question on your first point about lawyers. Do you think there will ever be an end to the billable hour?
I think Yoda in Star Wars said it best. Difficult to see the future is.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Cass, I'm getting a lot of questions on something that I think we touched on, but I didn't think I asked as pointedly as some of these questions, which is a nudge inherently paternalistic?
Well, I think we need a definition of paternalistic, and I think the answer is no. Dick Thaler and I are big on libertarian paternalism, but a warning that a product contains shellfish, it's a nudge. Don't eat it if you're allergic to shellfish. Is that paternalistic? Yeah. Probably not. If you get on a medicine a bunch of side effects and statements about combining this medication with that, is that paternalistic? No, but it's a nudge.
It's a great answer. I want to shift gears slightly to philanthropy and how you see the intersection of nonprofits in the world of philanthropy with public sector, which is obviously much bigger. It's different, but what is the role of nonprofits in the broader ecosystem?
What a great question. Okay, so the government, of course, in many countries does a great deal to help people who are struggling or to combat evils of various kinds. The government's resources, even if they are, massive, are infrequently adequate to the problem, and private philanthropy fills gaps in ways that are essential. So that's the first point. Philanthropists can have a kind of ingenuity and creativity that some governments struggle, at least to have as quickly as private philanthropists can have. So a little like what Justice Louis Brandeis said about the states, they're laboratories. Private philanthropists can be laboratories. They can discover things. Their effectiveness might be partly because of their comparative flexibility, might be higher, that they'll be able to do something that the government won't have thought of or won't have the legal authority to do. And there's that. There's also that people, okay, so another judge, I think it was a judge called Learned Hand, said taxes are the price we pay for civilization. But when people pay taxes, they don't feel good about themselves in the same way they feel. I am making an empirical, this is a hypothesis, in the same way they feel when they're giving to a private organization. Why is that? Well, you have to pay taxes. And how taxes affect any particular problem is hard to know. Whereas if you're giving resources, let's say, to an organization you care a lot about, that you know is going to help a problem that really concerns you, then your life is better. You've made other people's lives better, but your life is better. And that's, that's, economists think about welfare, but giving to others is a great way to increase one's own welfare. And that's unique to private philanthropy.
I completely agree. And it comes amidst the backdrop in kind of decreasing confidence in governments, in institutions, even in organizations and nonprofits. One thing that we continue to try to do is to disintermediate ourselves. At the end of the day, it's a donor giving to another human. And it's, yes, there's work that we have to do, and people do trust us to do that work, but ultimately you're trusting another person. And how much we can show that directness and the incrementality of that gift, the fact that something is happening that wouldn't happen otherwise, the better. Have you seen anything in government? Because I've often wondered why there's not more effort to make that direct link. If you want roads, if you want public schools, if you want this, taxes have to go there. And you'll see some kind of folks in the crypto community saying, well, this is, if we just pay taxes in crypto, you could actually trace it through the system so I could see where my money went. Has there any thought about traceability?
It's a great question. I have seen in newspaper reports that that some American officials in the recent past, let's say, have been very concerned to ensure that programs that are funded by the American taxpayer are visible to the American taxpayer so that they can see that the program that they maybe supported is producing this concrete result for them and people they care about. So my dog is very appreciative of that idea. See from his enthusiastic barking.
That's real enthusiasm. Can you hear me okay, Cass?
I can hear you just great. I think you can hear dog barking as well, but
it's a great twist.
Adds to the reality.
One of the hot topics recently, and we've obviously been involved, is universal basic income. Now, at some level, the universality can be a bit misleading, because obviously the wealthiest are still going to be net taxpayers to the program, and the poorest will be net tax receivers. But there is a very core behavioral element, which is everybody gets a check in the mail. So you've all contributed to this program and you all get a check in the mail. What is the behavioral research? And I don't know where I am on the behavioral bit, but what do you think of the behavioral component of a program like that?
I think we don't have enough behavioral research, at least not that I'm aware of, to have clarity on the behavioral side. So are you thinking a little bit of the following kind of issue, that if a program is targeted to people who are struggling, then it has a targeted quality, which is positive, but it also could stigmatize people. That's
exactly.
And that's something a lot of people worry about. And it is a question whether the stigma is there and whether it's intrinsic to the targeting, or whether there's something about the meaning of the targeting which isn't desirable and which isn't sought, which could be taken care of through other means. If it's the case that everyone is eligible for the thing, then there's no stigma associated with it. But of course, the downside is that the resources are going to people who don't need them, and maybe that means less is available for people who do need them. And I don't think there's a one. I think we need to know much more about the behavioral side, and it might be the answer is there isn't a one answer to every problem that has that choice in it.
Well, I think I don't have the evidence, but just some anecdotes that I found really powerful. So we did relief work after Hurricane Harvey in Houston. And we went and said, we don't have enough funds to cover everybody in this region. We're going to give to people that are already on some form of government benefit. That's our best indicator of poverty. And the community came back to us and said, please don't do that. And everyone said that. The people that would have received and the people that would not. And they said, look, this is just going to further the stigma and separate us from the others. What we much prefer you do, which is what we had started to do, actually do a lottery, do a public drawing with the wheel and pull names out of the hat. And even if I don't get, it will be fairer and I won't have that stigma. Which is just a really eye-opening moment for me. And it's one that's actually repeated itself in a number of African villages, because I always ask, in the places we're doing universal, do you think this is unfair? Like, you're the poorest person in the community, or among the poorest, and the wealthiest is getting the same. And wealth is obviously relative. And they say, no, it's much better this way. Because before it was wealthy and poor, and now we're all recipients of this program. And what that means is we can go to the courtyard, we can go to the schoolyard, and we can talk about what are we going to do with our $30 a month. And that becomes a community conversation that otherwise wouldn't have been. It would have been an isolating conversation. So take those two anecdotes for what they're worth, but I found them pretty powerful.
Yeah, they're extremely interesting. It shows the immense importance of listening to people from the relevant community. It may turn out that what you thought was true just isn't.
It's the lesson we learn constantly. Cass, I think we have time for one more question. I'm just going to ask you the open-ended question. You have been around poverty programs, you've been around the law, behavioral. Any advice to donors on how to think about where to give their money most effectively? And any advice to GiveDirectly on how we could make our programming most effective?
Well, on where to give, look at the data. So for giving decisions, it's often a quick intuitive judgment that you like the beneficiary group, but look as carefully as you can as well as the data show about effectiveness. And in terms of the organizations, there's a little framework making the rounds called the FEAST framework. It's built based on decades of behavioral science. And yes, it's an acronym. And the E is for easy, the A is for attractive, the S is for social, the T is for timely, and the F is for fun. And the F is the newest part. It used to be the EAST framework. It's now the FEAST framework. And I think for organizations, each of those letters has, a lot of research behind it, and they're easily adaptable to particular challenges.
That's really thoughtful. Cass, thank you so much for the time. Thank you everyone for joining. There is a link in the chat to Nudge. I would also highly recommend Sludge, especially for those in the field of poverty eradication where there's plenty. We will post the recording and thank you all.